I took the red-eye to surprise my grandfather, but my keycard to the mansion failed. My room was empty. Every photo of me was gone from the memory wall, as if I never existed. The new butler whispered, "They cleared it yesterday. Family orders." Just then, I heard my grandfather's safe click shut upstairs. "My name is Madison Knight. I am 29 years old, and my job is to see the pattern in the noise. At Vanguardus Analytics, they pay me to identify, assess, and mitigate risk before it happens. I am the person who tells corporations how their systems can fail, how their people can be compromised, and how the assets they thought were secure can be stripped away, piece by piece, until nothing is left but an empty shell. I am very good at my job. I was not, however, prepared to apply that skill set to my own family. The plan was simple. I had wrapped up the Vanguard's fourth quarter projections 2 days early, a minor miracle that won me a grudging nod from my director and a clear window before the Thanksgiving holiday. I booked a red-eye from Chicago to Portland, rented a car, and drove the 2 hours to Seabrook. I had a small, temperature-controlled bag on the passenger seat, holding a canister of loose-leaf silver needle tea. It was my grandfather's favorite, a specific blend he claimed was the only thing that settled him, and I had intended to be the one to brew his morning cup. A surprise. The Hale estate is not a subtle place. My grandfather, Roland Hale, built his fortune from the ground up, starting with 2 lumber mills and leveraging that into a sprawling investment empire. He believed a man's home should reflect his work, and the mansion was a fortress of Oregon cedar and glass, set back 3 miles from the main road. The first sign of trouble was the gate. The long-range scanner picked up my rental's license plate, and the heavy iron gates swung open, just as they should. The system recognized the plate I had registered for my visit, but the guard booth, usually empty unless we had a major event, was occupied. A man in a crisp black uniform stepped out. I did not recognize him. I slowed the car, rolling down the window. "Can I help you, Miss?" His tone was flat, not hostile, but utterly impersonal. "I'm Madison Knight, Roland's granddaughter, just heading up to the house." He tilted his head, looking at his screen. "I don't have a Madison Knight on the approved arrivals list for today." "I'm not on the list," I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. It was 5 in the morning and the fog from the coast was chilling. "I'm a surprise for my grandfather. I live here, part-time. Just use my keycard." I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy proximity card attached to my Chicago keys. I always kept it. It was my access to the East Wing, my personal suite. I leaned out and swiped it at the pedestal. The light flashed red, deactivated, a cold prickle, sharper than the sea air, went down my spine. "Cards rejected," the guard said, stating the obvious. "That's impossible. Try it again." Red. "Look," I said, my voice hardening. "My name is Madison Knight. My grandfather is Roland Hale. I am a resident of this house. My license plate, which your system clearly recognized, is tied to my security profile. You can see my driver's license. You can run my prints, but you are going to let me up to that house. My job involves a certain amount of calculated intimidation." The guard blinked. He was new, he was following a protocol, and I had just introduced a variable he was not trained for. He tapped on his screen again, likely looking at the vehicle registry. He saw my name. He sighed, the sound of a man who was not paid enough to argue with the boss's family. "The gate's open, ma'am. But my system says your card is inactive. You'll have to get a new one from household management." "I will," I said, and rolled up the window, driving through before he could change his mind. The long drive up to the house was unnervingly quiet. No grounds crew, no early morning deliveries. The house itself sat dark against the gray pre-dawn sky. I parked in my usual spot by the east entrance, grabbed my suitcase and the tea, and used my physical key on the door. Thank God. That still worked. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me. It was wrong. The grand corridor always smelled the same old cedar, a faint trace of the pipe tobacco Roland kept in his study, and the beeswax Mrs. Petri used on the floors. The cedar was there, but it was suffocated by something else, a sharp, chemical tang, bleach, not the scent of a routine cleaning, but the acrid smell of a deep, deliberate scrub down. I left my suitcase at the bottom of the stairs and walked to my room. The runner on the grand staircase was new, a plush, corporate gray instead of the worn, familiar Persian. The silence in the hallway was absolute. No ticking of the grandfather clock. It must have been wound down. I reached my door. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and I stopped. The word is not empty. Empty implies a space waiting to be filled. My room was not empty. It was erased. The custom-built walnut bed frame was gone. The armchair where I read was gone. The heavy damask curtains were gone, replaced by simple, sterile vertical blinds. My desk was gone. The bookshelves were vacant. Every single book, every paperback I had collected since I was 15. Gone. The closet door was open, revealing a row of bare metal hangers, my clothes, my shoes, my jackets, all gone. I walked numbly into the center of the room. The walls were bare. The frames that had held photos of me and my grandfather, of my graduation, of my first marathon, were missing. There were only faint, rectangular outlines on the wallpaper, lighter than the surrounding pattern, marking where they had hung. My hand went to the wall, tracing one of those ghosts. I moved to the built-in shelving unit, the one my grandfather had designed for me. The drawers were all open, all empty. In the bottommost drawer, I saw a fine layer of dust, but not old dust. It was the fresh, gritty dust that comes from sweeping, from a hasty, rough cleaning. On the side of the shelving unit, near the bottom, was a white adhesive label. I knelt. It was a storage tag. Ridgeway Storage, it read, and beneath that, a date, yesterday's date. I stood up and went to the small, discreet panel beside the fireplace. It looked like a knot in the wood. I pressed it, and the secret compartment my grandfather and I had built popped open. It was our joke, our little shared secret from an old spy movie. The compartment was empty. My leather-bound notebook was gone. The one where I kept private notes, thoughts, even passwords. It was gone. I ran my fingers along the inside edge of the compartment, feeling the raw wood. My stomach tightened into a knot of such cold, sharp dread that I nearly gagged. They had known about this. Someone knew. But as I pulled my hand back, my fingernail caught on something. On the outer lip of the shelf, just barely visible, was a tiny carved notch. I had made it with a pocket knife when I was 16, testing the compartment's secrecy, a tiny T-shaped mark. They had taken the notebook, but they had missed the notch. It was proof. It was my proof. This was my room. "Can I help you?" I spun around. A woman stood in the doorway. She was in her 50s, wearing crisp navy blue scrubs and sensible shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she held a tablet. Her expression was one of mild, professional inquiry. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice sounding harsh in the sterile room. "I am Opal Gray," she said, her voice smooth and modulated. "I'm with Sunline Care Partners. I'm Mr. Rowland's new primary care coordinator." What happened to Mrs. Petri? Mrs. Petri had been with my grandfather for 30 years. She had practically raised me. "Mrs. Petri took her early retirement last week," Opal Gray said, without a flicker of emotion. "A well-deserved rest. You must be Madison." "I am, and this is my room. What happened to it?" Opal glanced at her tablet. "Ah, yes. We had to relocate and store the items in this wing to accommodate Mr. Rowland's expanded nursing needs. We require a sterile field for some of the equipment, and this room was designated for conversion." "Conversion to what?" "A therapeutic observation suite. It's all very standard for a patient of his profile." My blood ran cold. "Patient profile, I spoke to him 3 days ago. He was fine. He was complaining about the timber futures on the Nikkei." "His condition can be variable," Opal said, taking a step into the room. "We find that minimizing external stimuli is best for his rest." I looked at the desk. The one that had replaced my antique writing table was a cheap, laminate hospital-grade model. On it sat a single, cream-colored envelope. I crossed the room and picked it up. It was unsealed. I pulled out the card. Schedules and room assignments have been reorganized to prioritize the ongoing nursing requirements of Mr. Roland Hale. We appreciate your understanding during this transition. It was printed. There was no signature. Appreciating my understanding is a bit optimistic. Don't you think? I said, holding up the card. Who ordered this? My Aunt Marla, my cousin Brett. Opal Gray's face remained a mask of professional neutrality. All directives come through the estate's designated asset manager, Mr. Qualls, in coordination with the family's wishes. Terry Qualls, of course. I want to see my grandfather, I said, dropping the card. I'm afraid that's not possible just now, she said. Mr. Roland is resting. He's had a very taxing morning, and we've just administered his midday medication. It's 6 a.m. His schedule has been adjusted to optimize his sleep cycles, she said, tapping her tablet. He is not to be disturbed. Doctor's orders. I pulled out my phone. I hit the first number on my favorites. My grandfather's personal cell. It rang once, twice, then clicked. This is Opal, Mr. Hale's care coordinator. I looked from the phone in my hand to the woman standing in front of me. She was holding a second, identical phone, and had just silenced my call. He is resting, she repeated, her voice a fraction firmer. He is not receiving visitors or calls. I ended the call. The silence in the room stretched, thick and hostile. My mind, the part of me that is Vanguardist analytics, began to move. The anxiety that had been clawing at my throat was replaced by a sudden, glacial clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a poorly timed redecoration. This was a systematic removal. A risk analyst does not panic. A risk analyst gathers data. I turned my back on Opal Gray. I see. Thank you for the update. Ms. Gray, I'll just get my bearings. Of course, she said. If you need new accommodations, you'll have to speak with household management. She turned and walked away, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the freshly polished floors. The moment she was gone, I pulled my phone back out. I did not call anyone. I opened the proprietary app that Vanguardist uses for corporate espionage and fraud documentation. It is time-stamped, geolocating, and encrypted. I started at the door. I photographed the empty room from all 4 corners. I photographed the empty closet. I photographed the bare walls, zooming in on the faint outlines of my pictures. I photographed the open, empty drawers and the film of dust. I photographed the Ridgeway storage tag, getting a clear shot of the date and item number. I photographed the unsigned, printed note. I photographed the cheap, new laminate desk. I went to the secret compartment. I photographed the empty interior, and then I photographed the small, T-shaped notch I had carved. My mark, my proof of prior use. I logged the time of my arrival. I logged the name Opal Gray and her company, Sunline Care Partners. I noted the discrepancy in her statement about midday medication at 6 a.m. I noted the diversion of my grandfather's personal cell phone to his nurse. I noted the deactivation of my keycard. I stood at the window, looking out over the grounds. The sky was turning a watery, pale blue, and as I watched, the spotlights illuminating the south lawn flickered. Once, twice, then snapped off. It was not a power surge. It was someone at a control panel, someone watching the security feed, who had just realized the sun was coming up. I looked at the corner of the lawn, near the main drive. A new sign was hammered into the grass, one I had missed in the dark. It wasn't the old, local Seabrook security sign. This one was black and silver. Northgate Shield. A new company, a more expensive company. They had been busy. They had canceled my access. They had removed my possessions. They had isolated my grandfather. They had replaced his loyal, long-time staff with their own people. They had changed the security firm. They had done it all in the narrow window when I was on a plane. Unreachable, between one city and the next. They had erased me. But a risk analyst knows that every system has a vulnerability. Every action leaves a data trail. They thought they were clearing a room. What they had actually done was trigger an audit. I would not storm down the hall. I would not scream at Opal Gray or my Aunt Marla or my cousin Brett. A loud confrontation was what they expected. It would get me labeled as emotional, unstable, a distraction from my grandfather's care. No, I needed data. I needed a clear sequence of events, and I needed to choose my timing. I am Madison Knight. My job is to find the cracks in the fortress, and they had just shown me exactly where to look. I left the sterile chill of the erased room and walked, not to the grand staircase, but down the service corridor toward the south guest wing. My suitcase rolled silently behind me on the stone floor. This was not a guest wing anyone used. It was dusty, smelling faintly of mothballs and old upholstery, and, most importantly, it was forgotten. It was safe. As I walked, the timeline began to build itself in my head. This wasn't a sudden attack. This was the result of a 3-year campaign. It started 3 years ago, when Roland had his first heart scare. It was officially a minor arrhythmia, but I saw the EKG data. It was a warning shot. I was deep in my career at Vanguardis in Chicago, but I looked at the follow-up plan his local doctor had prescribed, and it was lazy. The insurance optimization was non-existent. The estate, for all its wealth, was medically and logistically vulnerable. So I came home. I split my time, half the month in Chicago, half the month here in Seabrook. Vanguardis was fine with it. They considered it a good way to keep an analyst embedded with a high-net-worth family. I took over Roland's schedule. I digitized his records. I found him a new cardiology team in Portland. I reviewed his long-term care insurance and discovered he was underinsured by about 40%. I fixed it. I vetted 3 separate high-end care facilities, touring them under an assumed name, just to have a contingency plan. We never used them. Roland's health stabilized, but I saw the other vulnerabilities, the family, the estate. I began to map his assets. It's what I do. There was the Northvale Trust, a complex, generation-skipping entity that held the bulk of his liquid and market assets. There was Hale Meridian Holdings, the legacy company that managed the timber ranches and the real estate portfolio, and then the properties themselves, this mansion, the coastline properties, the sprawling acres of forest that were his first love, and then there was the opposition, my phalanx of the incompetent, as I privately called them, my Aunt Marla. Roland's only daughter. Marla had never worked a day in her life. She lived in a perpetual state of managing her charities, which was funded by a generous stipend from the family fund. She saw Roland's checkbook as an extension of her own. My cousin Brett, Marla's son. Brett was ambition without ability. He was always launching a new venture. His latest was a disastrous attempt at a craft cocktail bar in Portland. I had seen the reports. He was deep in debt, using his company card for personal expenses, and I suspected he was pulling from the holdings accounts, unauthorized. And finally, Terry Qualls, the asset manager. Terry was meant to be the firewall, the fiduciary protecting Roland's interests. But Terry was weak, terrified of confrontation, and hopelessly intimidated by Marla's entitlement and Brett's bluster. He managed the money by appeasing them. They all hated me. I wasn't the blood daughter. I was the child of Roland's estranged son, the one who got away. I was the outsider, the Chicago analyst, who suddenly had a room in the house and, worse, a seat at the table. I asked for receipts. I produced spreadsheets. I questioned the consulting fees Marla claimed and the seed money Brett demanded. I remembered sitting in the study with Roland, maybe 6 months ago. He was looking at a projection I'd run on the trust's burn rate if Marla's and Brett's spending continued unchecked. "Terry says you're interfering with the family allocation," Roland had said, not looking up. "Terry calls it an allocation. I call it an unsecured liability. Brett's bar is failing, and he's using the holdings credit line to float it." Roland had been quiet for a long time, studying the figures. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes sharp and clear. "Marla says I'm her father. Brett says I'm his grandfather. Terry says I'm his client. They all tell me what I'm supposed to feel. He tapped the spreadsheet. You, he said, are the only one who tells me the real numbers. Madison, the only one? That's why I was a threat. I wasn't just managing his heart. I was auditing his legacy. I reached the south guest room and locked the door behind me. It was musty, but it was secure. I pulled out my laptop, plugged it into the wall, and used my personal hotspot. I wasn't trusting the house network. My security credentials for the Hale network were still active. An oversight, most likely. They had focused on my physical access, the key card, assuming I was the type to rattle a doorknob. They hadn't considered I would check the server logs. I pulled the access logs for the Northgate Shield security system. My keycard profile. Night, Madison, status deactivated, time of action, yesterday. At 3:34 in the afternoon, I checked my flight itinerary. At 3:34 yesterday, I was 30,000 feet over Wyoming. My phone in airplane mode. The timing was precise. They had waited until I was completely unreachable. I pulled Roland's medical file, the fatigue he'd mentioned on the phone last week, the sudden tiredness. It was all here. His original cardiologist was gone, replaced by a consulting physician at home. That would be Sunline's doctor. I saw the pharmacy logs. A new prescription for a mild sedative, administered 3 times a day. His previous tests, the ones I had scheduled, were stable. This wasn't a medical decline. This was an induced fog. They were scheduling his rest to keep him quiet. I needed air. I needed to see. I left the guest room. Walking quietly through the house, I avoided the main wing where Opal Gray might be. I walked down the great hall, the one that led to the library. Roland called it the memory wall. It was lined with photos. The Hale family, going back generations. And I saw it. It was a small change, but it was a declaration of war. My favorite picture was gone. It was a photo of me, aged about 12, and Roland. We were on his fishing boat, holding up a massive salmon, both of us grinning, drenched in rain and mud. It was a day of genuine joy. It had hung next to his portrait for a decade. The photo was gone. In its place, in a new, gleaming silver frame, was a picture of Brett. He was wearing a suit, cutting a ribbon at some charity gala. It was a posed, artificial, public relations shot. They were literally replacing my history with his. I felt the anger rise, hot and acidic, but I pushed it down. This was data. The photo swap was a symbolic execution, meant to reinforce the message I was not family. I went back to my laptop. I opened my email. Nothing from the family. No, Madison. We need to talk. No, we've made some changes for your grandfather's health. But I wasn't looking for an email sent to me. I had access to the shared family calendar. There it was. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Hale family meeting. Location Roland's study. Attendees Marla Hale, Brett Hale, Terry Qualls. Status required. I was not on the invite list. I had not been CC'd. And in that second, the entire strategy became clear. It wasn't just spite. It wasn't just a power play. It was a legal maneuver. Why clear my room? Why not just deactivate my key? Why hire a storage company and tag my belongings? Because of the trust. I pulled up the digital copy of the Northvale Trust, the one I had spent weeks annotating 3 years ago. I scrolled past the financial distribution, past the executor clauses, to Section 9, Subsection C. Provisions for resident beneficiary. A resident beneficiary, a member of the family physically residing in the primary estate. It was a clause I had helped Roland draft, designed to protect him, a resident beneficiary. The clause stated, must be present for any vote regarding the primary beneficiary's Roland's medical or financial autonomy. They held a specific, limited power of oversight. I was the only resident beneficiary. By clearing my room, by removing my belongings, by creating a paper trail that I had been to storage. They were terminating my legal status. They were downgrading me from resident to visitor, and a visitor has no say. A visitor can be told he is resting. The meeting tomorrow morning, that was the kill shot. With me legally sidelined, They would vote. They would present the new doctor's report, the one citing his fatigue and confusion. They would have Terry Qualls present a new, simplified power of attorney, one that transferred control from me and Roland to a committee Marla, Brett, and Terry. I looked at the empty room. They hadn't just cleared out my sweaters and my books. They had cleared out my standing. I shut the laptop. The urge to cry, to scream, was overwhelming. But I didn't. Crying is a reaction. I needed an action. My job is risk assessment. This was a hostile takeover. This was corporate fraud. I would treat it as such. I opened a new, encrypted note. Asset Roland Hale. Threat fraudulent incapacitation. Hostile actors. Marla Hale. Motive financial dependency. Brett Hale motive debt. Greed. Terry Qualls. Motive complicity. Covering mismanagement. Vulnerabilities. Sunline Care. Partners. Opal Gray. Northgate Shield. The unknown notary who signed off on the new POA. I needed the contingency plan. My mind flashed back. The basement. The archive room. The rows and rows of file cabinets. Roland, showing me the room after we signed my medical POA. He had pulled on the drawer of an old gray cabinet. "This key always sticks," he'd said, rattling it. "Always gets jammed." He tapped the side of the cabinet, a specific spot. "There's an old timber contract in there, and tucked inside it, a manila envelope. Says, if I can't talk on it, if things ever get sticky, Maddie, you go to that file first." It wasn't a joke. It was a fire drill. I picked up my phone. It was just past 7 in the morning. I scrolled through my contacts, past the Hale family entries, to H, Hannah Whitcomb, Harbor Finch LLP. Hannah was Roland's attorney for 30 years, the one who built the estate, before Terry Qualls convinced him to diversify to a more modern firm last year. Hannah was 70, smoked cigars, and was the most ruthless estate litigator in the Pacific Northwest. She answered on the second ring. "Whitcomb. Hannah, it's Madison Knight." A pause. I heard the scratch of a match. "You're supposed to be in Chicago. This better be good." "I'm at Seabrook," I said, my voice cold and even. "I need to retain you. Effective immediately. I'm looking at a coordinated asset grab. They've isolated Roland. They're medicating him. They've replaced the staff. And they've erased me from the house. There's a family meeting tomorrow morning to push a new POA. The silence on the other end was heavy, appreciative. "I'll cancel my morning," she said. "I'm 3 hours out. Start from the moment you landed. Night, and do not leave out a single number." The call with Hannah Whitcomb did not calm me. It focused me. I hung up with a clear directive. Hannah would handle the legal framework. I had to provide the evidence. I had until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to dismantle a perfectly constructed coup. I started with the paper trail. I went to the household management office, a small, pressurized room off the main kitchen. The new Northgate guards had a desk set up outside it, but I walked past them as if I owned the place, which, technically, I almost did. Inside, a nervous young man I did not recognize was organizing invoices. "I need the manifest," I said, not introducing myself. He looked up, startled. "The manifest for—" "The Ridgeway storage pickup. Yesterday. East Wing. Room 204. My room?" He paled, clearly recognizing me from photos. "Ah, yes. Miss Knight. I'm not sure I'm authorized." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "My authorization comes from Roland Hale. The manifest. Now." He fumbled with his keyboard and printed the shipping order. I didn't take it. I photographed it with my phone. The storage tag I'd seen on my shelf was just a number. This manifest was a confession. The items were listed generically: furniture, books, personal effects, but at the bottom, in the space for the authorizing trustee, was the signature, T. Qualls, Terry Qualls. He hadn't just approved the removal. He had personally taken custody of my assets. Next, the medicals. I went back to the safety of the south guest room and my laptop. The network access was still a gaping hole they hadn't bothered to close. I pulled the estate's financials. I found the Sunline Care Partners contract. It was initiated 10 days ago. The fee was astronomical, nearly double what Mrs. Petrie's staff had cost. I scanned the itemized list, and there it was. Tier 3 isolation package. The description was sanitized. Corporate nonsense. Provided to reduce external stressful stimuli and optimize patients' recuperative environment. Isolation package. They gave it a name. They monetized the act of cutting him off from me. I cross-referenced the date. 9 days ago. That was the day I'd had my last clear phone call with Roland. The day after. He had started sounding tired. I pulled the medical provider logs. Roland's family physician, Dr. Bellamy, who had treated him for 20 years, was listed as on hold. A new provider was listed, Dr. Eris, affiliated with Sunline Care Partners, a consulting physician at home. The request to change providers was logged 9 days ago, citing family preference, signed by Marla, approved by Terry. They weren't just managing his health, they were controlling his reality. Now, the room, the physical act. I accessed the Northgate Shield security portal. I found the camera logs for the East Wing corridor. Yesterday, I watched the timestamp. At 3:59 in the afternoon, the feed went blue. System maintenance, the screen read. At 4:44 in the afternoon, the feed came back online. 45 minutes. A 45-minute scheduled blackout, just long enough to gut the room without a single digital witness. I looked at the timing again. 3:59 p.m. That was just after my keycard was deactivated. It was a sequence. Lock me out digitally, then erase me physically. I pulled up the portal for the Northvale Trust. My analyst credentials were still valid. They had forgotten I set up the portal for Roland. I saw a system-wide notification posted yesterday at 5:00 p.m. Please be advised, the primary family contact for the Roland Hale account has been updated. The new contact was Marla Hale. The sequence was complete. Disable my access, erase my room, black out the cameras, remove me as a resident, seize control of the trust's communication, all in under 2 hours. But they were missing the weapon, the new power of attorney, the one they would use at the meeting tomorrow. Where was it? They would need copies. They would need it scanned, emailed, and ready. I headed for the business office, where the heavy-duty networked printer was. I found Jenna, a junior admin assistant, in a full-blown panic. The air smelled of hot toner and ozone. The massive printer was flashing a red error light, and she was nearly in tears, trying to wrestle a jammed piece of paper from its internal gears. "I don't know what happened," she whispered, terrified. "Mr. Qualls needed this whole packet scanned and emailed for the 9:00 meeting, and it's shredded the original, and he's going to kill me." "Let me," I said, moving her gently aside. I am, if nothing else, an expert at dealing with jammed systems. I clicked open the access panels. "Where's the file on the network?" It's the only copy," she whimpered. "The original. He gave me the hard copy." I looked at the scanner bed. She had left the document open, and I looked at the crumpled paper I was pulling from the rollers. "Durable power of attorney." "Give me the shreds," I said. "And the version on the scanner. I'll fix this. I'll piece it together and scan it clean. Go get a coffee. Tell Mr. Qualls I'm handling it. Tell him I'm ensuring his documents are perfect for the meeting." She looked at me, gratitude warring with confusion, and fled. I was alone with the kill shot. I smoothed the undamaged portion on the scanner glass. It was a scan, not an original. The first red flag. A true POA would have an embossed, raised seal from the notary. This one just had a flat, black and white image of one. I looked at the signature. Roland Hale. My blood went cold. I knew my grandfather's signature better than my own. It was sharp, angular, impatient. This signature was soft. The R in Roland was looped and feminine, almost decorative. It was completely wrong. I pulled out my phone. I went into the digital archives I had built. I pulled up the minutes from a Hale Meridian Holdings board meeting from 6 months ago. the minutes Terry Qualls had signed. I looked at Terry's signature. I looked at the forged Roland. The R in Roland was a perfect identical match to the T in Terry. He had not even bothered to change his handwriting. The arrogance, the sheer, sloppy arrogance. He had used his own cursive style to sign my grandfather's name. I zoomed in on the notary seal. The scan was blurry, but I could make out the name. Kestrel Notary, and the pattern of the stamp. It was a Stockwell 331. I knew that stamp. I knew it because Terry Qualls ordered all his supplies from the same catalog, and he loved the prestigious look of the Stockwell line. He had used his own office embosser. This POA was not just a forgery, it was a self-portrait of the criminal. I stood up and walked into the hallway. I dialed the number for Kestrel Notary. A woman answered. Kestrel Notary, this is Susan. Susan, I said, my voice calm and professional. This is Madison Knight with Vanguardus Analytics. I'm conducting a routine audit for the Hale estate. I'm verifying a durable power of attorney notarized by your office, supposedly on November 3rd. Can you confirm that transaction? One moment, I heard typing. Hale estate. No, I don't see anything for November. In fact, we haven't processed any documents for Mr. Roland Hale in over 6 months. Thank you, Susan, I said. You've been very helpful. I hung up. I had it. The storage manifest, the isolation invoice, the camera blackout, the fraudulent POA, the fake notary, but I still could not get to my grandfather. I went to the kitchen. Opal Gray was there, directing a new chef on Roland's approved low-sodium diet. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Oregon is a one-party consent state. As long as I was a participant in the conversation, it was legal. I placed the phone screen down on the counter. Ms. Gray, I said. She turned, her face tightening. Miss Knight, I told you, he's resting. I'd like to schedule a time, perhaps after lunch. I'm sure his new doctor wouldn't mind if I sat quietly with him for 10 minutes. That's not possible, she said, her voice dropping. His new protocol is very strict. Mrs. Hale and Mr. Brett have been clear. No peripheral family. The stress is simply too much for him. Stress. My grandfather thrives on stress. He reads timber reports for fun. She lost her professional veneer. A flash of pure frustration crossed her face. Look, Mrs. Hale is trying to protect her father. That old man is surrounded by people asking for things. He will sign anything if Brett tells him it's for a new charity. He signed off on my contract, didn't he? He needs people who can protect him from that kind of constant manipulation. And there it was, a full admission. She was there to protect him from me, while acknowledging Brett was manipulating him. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and saved the file. I had the digital evidence. I had the audio. Now I needed the one thing Roland had left me. I couldn't get to the basement. The Northgate guards were posted at the main stairs, but I knew someone who wasn't Northgate. I found Luis in the greenhouse, pretending to inspect the orchids. Luis had been Roland's head of security for 20 years, before they restructured him out for Northgate Shield. Roland had kept him on as a grounds manager to save his pride. Roland had also paid, in cash, for Luis's wife's cancer treatments. Luis was a man defined by honor. He saw me and his face fell. He looked ashamed. Maddie, he said, his voice low. They told me you were on a long-term assignment in Asia. They lied. Luis, they have him locked in his room. They've replaced everyone. I know, he said, staring at a purple orchid. The new team, Northgate, they're efficient. I need to get into the archive room, the one in the basement. They have a guard on the stairs. Luis looked at me, his eyes full of a conflict I understood. Maddie, I just manage the dirt now. They took my access. All of it. I asked. He hesitated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn gray keycard. It's a maintenance override for the irrigation systems and the deep archives. It's not supposed to work on the house, but the archive room is on the old circuit. He handed it to me. Be fast, he said, turning back to the orchids. They told me I was retired. I'm just watching the plants. I didn't run. I walked. I took the service elevator, a rattling cage near the kitchen, down to the basement. The smell of damp stone and old paper filled the air. I found the archive room, a single, gray metal door. I swiped Luis's card. The light flashed green, and the lock clicked. I was in. Rows of filing cabinets stood in the dim light. I knew exactly which one. 4th row, 3rd cabinet. I pulled the drawer. It stuck. I remembered Roland's words. This key always sticks, always gets jammed. I tapped the side of the cabinet, a hard rap with my knuckle. Just where he had shown me, I heard a faint internal click. The drawer slid open. I flipped past the timber contracts, and there, at the back, was a heavy manila envelope. On the front, in Roland's unmistakable, sharp handwriting, were 4 words. If I can't talk. My hands, which had been rock steady as I photographed forged documents and interrogated nurses, began to shake. I broke the wax seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, folded neatly, and beneath it, a small black USB flash drive. I unfolded the letter, my heart pounding against my ribs. I looked at the date at the top. It was dated 2 months ago. I unfolded the letter in the damp, quiet dark of the archive room. The paper was heavy, expensive vellum, the kind he only used for things that mattered. The handwriting was his, the sharp, fast, upward slanting script I had known my entire life. Maddie, it began. If you are reading this, and you did not get it from my hand, it means the test has begun. You may have found your room empty. You may have found me unwell. Do not be confused. This is not a failure of my health. It is a failure of their character. I have been watching them, the whispers, the private meetings with Terry, the way they look at my assets as if they are already theirs. I built this company, this life, by trusting numbers, not promises, and their numbers, Maddie, are rotten. They think you are a girl. They think you are my sentimental granddaughter. They have forgotten, or perhaps never knew, that you are the only one I ever trusted with the raw data. They will try to lock you out. They will try to lock me in. They will use my love for them as a weapon against me, and your love for me as a weapon against you. This is their test, and they are poised to fail it. This is also your test. Do not fail. My vision blurred. The hot, sudden sting of tears was a shock. I had not cried. I had been cold, analytical, and angry. But this was a message from him, from before. A hand reaching through time to tell me he knew. He saw it coming. I read on. The USB drive contains my answer. It is a video, dated. It contains my will, my mind, and my specific instructions. It names you, and it names them. It is your primary weapon. Do not lose it. Do not give it to them. There is more. I have a safe deposit box at Prairie First Bank, the one on the Coast Highway. The key is in my desk, the old brass one, taped under the top drawer. You know the one. Inside that box is my original, valid power of attorney, naming you as my primary agent. It also contains a draft of a new trust supplement. I was waiting for you to get home. I was waiting for Thanksgiving to sign it with you. That supplement is now your goal. One last thing. If they make me sleep, if you cannot get to me, if that woman Opal or any other stranger stands between us, you call Hannah Whitcomb. You tell her I invoked the Gardner Protocol. She will know what it means. You demand an emergency guardianship. You use the video. You use this letter. Do not let them steal my mind. Maddie, do not let them steal my voice. It was signed simply. Roland. I leaned against the cold metal cabinet, the letter shaking in my hand. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to weep. For him. For me. For the absolute, calculated betrayal of it. He had known. He had set this all in motion. This dreadful, necessary trap. And they had walked right into it. And he had, in his terrible foresight, cleared a path for me through the wreckage. I wanted to cry, but I could not. A cold, hard anger settled over me, displacing the grief. It was the feeling I got at Vanguardus right before I presented a finding of executive fraud. It was a hardening, a sharpening. I was no longer the granddaughter who had been erased. I was the auditor who had just been handed the real set of books. I stood up straight. I folded the letter and put it in my jacket pocket. Next to the USB drive, I walked out of the archive room, relocking the door. Back in the south guest wing, I locked the door and pulled the drive. I plugged it into my laptop. It was unencrypted. He wanted it to be easy to play. A video file. I double-clicked. My grandfather's face filled the screen. He was not in bed. He was in his study, sitting at his desk. He looked healthy, sharp, and furious. A newspaper was open on his desk. I zoomed in on the video. The date was visible, September 14th, 2 months ago. "This is Roland Hale," he said, his voice firm, not a trace of the fatigue I'd heard on the phone. "This recording is being made on September 14th, in my sound mind and body, with no one else present. I am making it as a legal contingency against my daughter, Marla Hale, my grandson, Brett Hale, and my financial manager, Terry Qualls." He read from a piece of paper. He listed, one by one, the key accounts at Northvale Trust. He listed the holdings in Hale Meridian. He stated, "For the record, my only authorized agent for medical decisions is Madison Knight. My only authorized co-signatory for financial matters, beyond Terry Qualls' limited fiduciary role, is Madison Knight." He looked directly into the camera. His eyes seemed to find me. "I am in full possession of my faculties," he said. "I am not tired, I am not confused, and I am not retiring. If any power of attorney is presented that is dated after September 14th of this year, it is a forgery. It is an act of fraud. I do not trust Terry Qualls. I do not trust my daughter, and I do not trust my grandson. They have been compromised by their own greed." He held up the letter I was now holding. "I have left a corresponding letter for Madison. She is the only one I trust. Do not trust any POA after this date." The video ended. I sat back, breathing hard. He hadn't just left me a key. He had left me a nuke. I got to work. First, I copied the video file onto 2 brand-new, encrypted USB drives. I took my phone and photographed the handwritten letter, every line. Second, I went to the empty household management office. I used their 24/7 courier service account. I sealed one of the encrypted USB drives in a tamper-proof evidence bag. I placed it in a FedEx Critical Legal overnight box. I addressed it to Hannah Whitcomb at Harbor Finch, marked, "Hold for personal pickup. Urgent." I sent it, even if they threw me out of the house. The primary evidence was off-site and in her hands. The second encrypted drive went into my pocket. The original drive and the original letter went into a money belt I strapped around my waist. Third, I called Hannah. "I've got it all," I said, my voice low and fast. "I have a handwritten letter from Roland, dated 2 months ago, detailing a test. He says he knew they were compromised. I have a video. It's time-stamped September 14th. He's lucid, he's angry, and he explicitly states any POA dated after that is a forgery. And Hannah, I have the forgery. It's dated November 3rd, and the signature is a trace of Terry's." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Good God. Maddie, he gave you the whole case," Hannah said. "This is it. Here's the plan. I'm filing an ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order, effective immediately. I'll get a judge to sign it based on the video alone. We will freeze every single asset in the Northvale Trust and Hale Meridian. They will not be able to sell a paperclip. Second, I am petitioning for an immediate independent medical evaluation and an emergency guardianship hearing. We are invoking Gardner Protocol. A court-appointed geriatric specialist will be in that house by noon tomorrow, whether Marla likes it or not. Send me the digital files, all of them, now." While the files uploaded, I began to build my binders. This is how I think. This is how I present. Binder A. The timeline. I printed my evidence log, the deactivated keycard, time-stamped, the storage manifest from Ridgeway Storage, signed by T. Qualls, the Sunline Care invoice, with the Tier 3 isolation package highlighted. The Northgate security logs, showing the 45-minute camera blackout, the Northvale Trust alert, naming Marla as primary contact, a complete, itemized timeline of my erasure. Binder B, the forgery. I printed a high-resolution scan of the fraudulent POA. On the page next to it, I printed the board meeting minutes with Terry's signature. I took a red pen and drew a clean analytical circle around the looped R in Roland and the looped T in Terry. I printed my email correspondence with Kestrel Notary, the one where they confirmed, "We have not processed any documents for Mr. Roland Hale in over 6 months." Binder C, the contingency. I placed a high-quality color copy of Roland's letter inside. I added a notarized affidavit from myself, attesting to the discovery and contents of the original USB drive, the original of which was now in the possession of legal counsel. I now had a physical and digital case that was airtight. I made my next call. I dialed the main number for Northvale Trust. I bypassed the automated system and got to the head administrator for high net worth accounts. "This is Madison Knight," I said, my voice all business. "I am formally lodging a notice of contest regarding account number 774B, the Roland Hale estate. I am challenging the authority of the newly listed primary contact, Marla Hale, and the asset manager, Terry Qualls, on the basis of undue influence and suspected fiduciary fraud. My legal counsel, Hannah Whitcomb of Harbor Finch, is overnighting the full petition. As per Section 14.f of the Trust's bylaws, I expect a full administrative freeze on all transactions, pending the resolution of this dispute. Am I understood?" The silence on the other end was profound. The administrator, terrified of being named in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, stammered, Yes, Miss Knight, I will place the administrative hold immediately." I hung up. The money was frozen. One last piece, the storage unit, my things. I went online. I couldn't just ping the unit, but I could create a data point. I went onto an office supply website. I ordered a case of archival quality document boxes. I paid for same-day rush delivery. I put the delivery address as Madison Knight, COO Ridgeway Storage, 1400 Industrial Way, Unit 405. Unit 405 was the number from the manifest. I included a note for the delivery. Must be signed for by authorized unit trustee, T. Qualls, or M. Knight. The package was now a legal probe. The courier's digital log would provide a time-stamped, GPS-located record of delivery. If Terry signed for it, he confirmed his control of the unit. If it was refused, it proved the unit was not a legitimate holding place. If it was lost, it would be even more suspicious. It was a tracker, a legal, public tracker. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text message. It was from Brett. "Heard you're back. Not a great time. You really shouldn't be here stirring things up. Roland needs his rest. Be supportive and let the doctors work." I looked at the message. The oily, condescending tone, the hypocrisy, stirring things up. I stood in the dusty south guest room, the 3 binders of evidence stacked neatly on the bed. I had the original letter and a copy of the video in my belt. I had a lawyer moving for a TRO. I had frozen the money. I had a court order for a doctor on the way. I typed one sentence back to my cousin. "He needs the truth." I hit send. Hannah moved with the speed of a predator. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the digital hammer came down. An email, cold and official, arrived from the court. The temporary restraining order was granted. 14 days. It was not just a freeze, it was a complete paralysis. Northvale Trust was forbidden from executing any transaction, any transfer, any sale. Hale Meridian Holdings was similarly shackled. Terry, Marla, and Brett were, in an instant, cut off from the bank. The taps were turned off, but freezing the known assets was only step 1. My job is risk assessment, and that means understanding the motive. They needed money, obviously, but the speed of their coup suggested they needed it now. Desperate people do desperate, Sloppy things. I went online and initiated a full uniform commercial code lien search on Terry Qualls, Brett Hale, and the holdings company. It cost $500 from my personal account. It was the best money I have ever spent. It took an hour for the searches to populate, and there it was. A UCC-1 financing statement, filed 3 weeks ago. Secured party a private, hard money lender in Portland I had never heard of. Debtor Terry Qualls, in his capacity as asset manager. And the collateral, 1 Patek Philippe Sky Moon Tourbillon, reference 6002G. My stomach clenched so hard I felt sick. It was Roland's prized watch, the one he kept in his study safe. The one he always said was too beautiful to wear. It was worth over $1 million. Terry hadn't just planned to steal. He was already using Roland's personal, priceless assets as collateral for a bridge loan. He was kiting checks with my grandfather's legacy. He was desperate. While I tracked the money, Hannah attacked the isolation. She filed a formal request for an immediate wellness check through Oregon's Adult Protective Services. It was not a polite request. It was a demand, backed by Roland's video. We have reason to believe, the filing read, that Roland Hale is being subjected to improper chemical restraint, isolation, and fiduciary abuse. The system, as slow as it often is, moves at the speed of light when a lawyer like Hannah Whitcomb hits it with a formal petition citing elder abuse. They scheduled a neutral party doctor and a state social worker to arrive before the end of the day. Opal Gray's reign was about to be interrupted by the state. The reaction to the TRO, however, was instantaneous. At 9:15, an email blast went out from Northvale Trust. The administrator who had sounded so terrified of me was now clearly terrified of them. Urgent family conference requested. They were calling the meeting. The 9 o'clock meeting I was never invited to, only now, I was the only person they wanted to talk to. They had scheduled it for the next morning. I hit reply all. My fingers were steady. I accept. I will be attending with my legal counsel, Hannah Whitcomb. I will also be bringing a court-certified stenographer to create a formal record of the proceedings. Please confirm you will accommodate. The request for a stenographer was a strategic bomb. It turned their shadow meeting into a formal deposition. There would be no, he said, she said. There would only be a transcript. Now I needed to fill in the gaps. I found Luis by the irrigation controls. Luis, I need the security logs. The real ones. The ones Northgate Shield installed, but also the old ones. The ones for the service gates. He didn't ask why. He had felt the shift in power. He knew I was fighting back. He just went to his maintenance shed. 20 minutes later, he handed me a flash drive. They're sloppy, he said, his voice low. They use the service gate because they think no one watches it. The main gate logs everything to the Northgate cloud. The service gate logs locally. To this, I checked the logs in the safety of the South Guest Room. Brett Hale, Terry Qualls. 3 separate visits, all after 10 o'clock at night, all using the rear service entrance that abutted the Ridgeway storage facility. They weren't just storing my things. They were using the storage facility as a staging ground for something else. Next, I formalized the fraud. I called Susan at Kestrel Notary. Susan, it's Madison Knight again. I need a formal affidavit. I emailed her the fraudulent POA scan. She was professionally outraged. That is not my seal. This is a complete fabrication. She agreed to sign a notarized affidavit stating she had never seen, signed, or notarized that document, and she would have it couriered to Hannah's office by lunch. Binder B was now legally invincible. While I handled the evidence, Hannah's junior associate, a litigator with a voice like a razor, placed a call to Sunline Care Partners. I was CC'd on the follow-up email summary. The questions were simple and brutal. Under whose medical authority was the Tier 3 isolation package prescribed? Please provide the diagnostic codes justifying this protocol and the name of the prescribing physician. Their response was a masterpiece of panicked backpedaling. Their corporate counsel replied within an hour. Sunline Care Partners provides services at the direction of the client's family and their designated medical professionals. The reduction of external contact was implemented at the verbal and written request of Mrs. Marla Hale, as the designated family representative to minimize family stressors. They attached the email. It was from Marla, sent from her phone. My niece is a known stressor. She is not to have contact, period. The doctor agrees this is best. They had thrown Marla under the bus to save their medical license. My phone buzzed. A new email. It was from Jenna, the terrified printer admin. The subject line was FYI. The body of the email was empty. There was just one forwarded message, an internal email from Terry Qualls to a private address I didn't recognize. The Port Archer Rooms auction is confirmed for the 28th. 48 hours. We need to move the seller assets tonight. The TRO is a problem, but it doesn't cover private sales of non-registered assets. The seller assets. My blood went cold. Roland's wine collection. It was legendary, worth a fortune, and it was unregistered, not part of the trust, but personal property. Terry was trying to liquidate it tonight, a black market sale. Before the TRO could be expanded to cover it, I couldn't wait for the court. I had to use a different kind of leverage. I opened my encrypted email. I took the original video file from Roland, the September 14th recording. I wrote a short, stark note. Mr. Davies, Judge Alito, my grandfather trusted you both as friends and as fiduciaries on his charity board. He is currently being held in isolation in his own home by my aunt and his asset manager, who have forged a POA. I have frozen his primary assets, but his captors are now attempting to liquidate his personal wine collection in a private auction within 48 hours. I have attached a video he made 2 months ago. He needs his friends. I need his allies. I sent it. I sent it to Arthur Davies and retired. Judge Michael Alito. The 2 members of Roland's charitable foundation board he respected most. I wasn't going public. I wasn't creating a media circus. I was activating his real inner circle. I was creating a trust fund of honor. These men would not sit by. They would start making calls. They would come to the house. They would become witnesses. I had one last call to make. I dialed the main branch of Prairie First Bank. My name is Madison Knight. I need to schedule an appointment to access safe deposit box 447. The bank manager took a moment. Ah, yes, Miss Knight. The Roland Hale box. I see you listed right here. You are the co-signer and secondary agent on the original 2018 power of attorney. My heart hammered. The original. The valid one. That's correct, I said, my voice steady. I have my key. I need access as soon as possible. Of course, he said. We have an opening tomorrow morning. Would 8:30 suit you? 8:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the family conference was scheduled to begin at the house. 8:30 is perfect, I said. I'll be there. The vault at Prairie First Bank was cold, quiet, and smelled of old paper and brass. The manager, a man who looked relieved to be following a simple, decades-old protocol, used his key, and I used the brass one I had retrieved from under Roland's desk. The manager slid the long, heavy metal box from the wall and placed it on a private viewing room table. I'll be just outside, Miss Knight. The box was heavy. I lifted the lid. There were no gold bars, no stacks of cash. It was all paper, and on top of the paper, another USB drive. First, I found the document I was looking for. Durable Power of Attorney. It was the original, signed and embossed in 2018, the one naming me. I slid it into my binder. Beneath it was a thick multi-page document, draft supplement to the North Vale Trust. I scanned the first page. I felt a chill. It was the document Roland had mentioned in his letter, the one he was waiting for me to come home to sign. It was dated in early September, but the signature lines at the end were blank. He was waiting for Thanksgiving. He was waiting for me. The supplement was a masterpiece of legal warfare. It did not disinherit Marla or Brett. That would be too simple, too easy to contest. Instead, it restructured. It placed all voting rights for Hale Meridian Holdings into a new, independent subcommittee. It mandated a full, independent, outside audit every 6 months. It explicitly capped all non-business family allocations at a fraction of their current rate. It was, in effect, a complete financial strangulation, turning Marla's stipend into a pittance and cutting off Brett's venture capital entirely. No wonder they had moved so fast. They must have suspected he was planning this. Next, I looked at the USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop. This one was encrypted, but on the outside of the drive, etched into the plastic, was a date. The date of my mother's birthday. His son's wife. A password. The file opened. Another video. Roland? Again. But this time, he wasn't in his study. He was in his car. Parked. The light falling on his face from the side window. He looked exhausted. Not sick, but bone-weary. The date stamp was later than the first video. This one was from 3 weeks ago. "I didn't think he would do it," he said, his voice rough. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the camera, to his record. I didn't think Terry would be the one." He held up a piece of paper. It was a financial statement. "He started moving the unregistered assets. He thinks I'm too stupid, too old, to watch the sub-accounts. He used my Patek, my Sky Moon. He used it as collateral for a hard money loan. My UCC search. I had been right." "He's borrowing against me," Roland said, his voice thick with a disgust that was deeper than anger. "He's desperate, and Brett is in on it. The money is going to that failed bar of his." He looked away, out the window of the car. "The smell of easy money. It makes people forget their honor. Maddie, it makes them forget who they are." He looked back. "Terry Qualls. I'm saying it for the record. Terry Qualls is compromised. He is actively stealing from me. If anything happens to me, you start with him. You put him in a legal box, and you do not let him out." The video clicked off. I sat there in the bank's viewing room, the silence absolute. He knew that, too. He knew about the watch. He had let it happen, letting Terry think he was getting away with it, all while he built his own case. Beneath the video drive, at the bottom of the box, was one last file. It was a list of charitable gifts, scheduled to be executed upon his death. Massive, legacy-defining gifts, a new wing for the Portland Art Museum, a full scholarship fund at his alma mater. But there was a handwritten clause, stapled to the front page, in Roland's writing. "All gifts listed herein are conditional. They are voided, in their entirety, if any durable power of attorney document, not co-signed by Madison Knight, is filed, activated, or otherwise presented to any financial institution after September 1st of this year." It was a dead man's switch. By filing their fraudulent POA, Marla, Brett, and Terry hadn't just tried to steal from him. They had, in effect, stolen millions from the most powerful charitable institutions in the state. They had made enemies they did not even know they had. I packed the box. I took the draft supplement, the original POA, the second video, and the charitable list. I handed the box back to the manager, my binders now heavy with the originals. I got in my car. It was 8:50 in the morning. The first call was to Hannah. "I'm heading back to the house. I have the original POA from 2018. I have an unsigned trust supplement, and I have a second video of Roland explicitly naming Terry in the theft of the Patek." "The chain of custody is critical," Hannah said, her voice sharp. "Do not let those documents out of your sight. I am sending an associate, David, to the house. He'll be there by 9:30. He is a notary, and he is a process server. He will take possession of the originals and get them filed with the court as supplemental evidence. The other side is walking into an ambush." "Got it. And Madison," she said. The judge saw the first video. He was impressed. The TRO is solid, and the petition for the wellness check is now a court order. The team from APS should be arriving at the house any minute. This is going to get loud. I was halfway to the estate when my phone chimed. Not a call, not a text, a data alert from my laptop, which was tethered to my hotspot, the delivery tracker, the archival boxes I had ordered. The status had updated, out for delivery. I clicked the link. I could see the courier's van, a small icon moving on a digital map. It was not at Ridgeway Storage. The van was moving down a private, Unmarked road. It was heading toward the docks, and the destination address, logged by the driver, was Port Archer Rooms, Atienne T. Qualls. He had rerouted my package, my probe. He had confirmed, with a digital signature, that he was at the illegal auction house, waiting to receive a shipment. I pulled the car over. I dialed the non-emergency number for the Port Archer Regional Police. "My name is Madison Knight," I said, my voice steady, professional. "I am an analyst for Vanguardis, and I am the legal agent for the Roland Hale estate. We are in the middle of a significant civil dispute, and I have a court-filed TRO. I have just received a digital notification that assets belonging to the estate specifically, items from a storage unit that are part of this civil action, are being moved to Port Archer Rooms as we speak. I am not alleging theft. I am alleging improper transport of disputed goods." I gave them the terms they understood. Civil dispute. Disputed goods. I am requesting that you dispatch an officer to hold the current state of those goods. Pending clarification of the civil order, my attorney, Hannah Whitcomb, can provide the TRO documentation immediately. I wasn't asking them to make an arrest. I was asking them to freeze a physical location. Just as I had frozen the bank accounts, I hung up and floored it. When I pulled up to the mansion, it was no longer quiet. A black sedan I did not recognize was parked in the driveway, along with a white van marked State of Oregon, Adult Protective Services. As I got out of my car, the front door opened, and Brett stumbled out. He was yelling, "This is private property. You have no right. We have a doctor. Our doctor says he is fine." A calm, tired-looking man in a state-issued windbreaker held up a piece of paper. "Sir, this is a court order. It's not a request. We are here to see Mr. Roland Hale. If you physically interfere, you will be arrested. Now, please step aside." I walked past Brett as if he were a piece of furniture. "I'm Madison Knight," I said to the man. "He's in the East Wing. His nurse is Opal Gray. She will likely tell you he is resting. The court order gives you priority." The man, a social worker, and a woman I assumed was the independent doctor, brushed past Brett and entered the house. Brett turned on me, his face purple. "You did this? You're destroying this family. You're confusing me with a mirror." "Brett," I said, and walked inside. I found them in Roland's suite. Opal Gray was standing in front of his bedroom door, her arms crossed, a picture of professional resistance. "He has had his medication. He cannot be disturbed. This is a violation of his—" Ms. Gray, the independent doctor, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, said, "I have an order signed by Judge Peterson. This order supersedes your authority, your employer's authority, and this family's authority. I am now evaluating your patient. Move." Opal Gray crumbled. She looked to Brett for help, but he was just standing in the hall, breathing heavily. She stepped aside. The doctor and the social worker went in. I stayed in the hall. We waited for 20 minutes. The silence was agonizing. Finally, the doctor came out. She looked at me, then at Brett. "Mr. Hale is perfectly lucid. He is oriented to time, place, and person. His cognitive function is, for a man his age, excellent." "See?" Brett snapped. "He's fine. This is harassment." "However," the doctor continued, her voice cutting through him, "his pharmacology report, the one your Dr. Aris provided, shows a standing order for a benzodiazepine that is, in my medical opinion, entirely contraindicated for a patient with his cardiac history. It's a low dose, but it's enough to induce fatigue and fogginess. He's not sick. He's been deliberately and improperly sedated." She looked at Opal. "I'll be making a full report to the state nursing board. Ms. Gray." Opal's face went white. She turned and walked, fast, down the hall. She was a liability who had just been exposed. The social worker came out. "He'd like to see his granddaughter, alone." I walked in. Roland was not in bed. He was sitting in his armchair by the window, wearing a robe. He looked pale, and he looked tired. but his eyes were the same. They were sharp. "Maddie," he said. I rushed to him, kneeling by his chair. He grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "That was quite an entrance," he whispered. "Are you all right?" He looked at me, a fierce, protective, angry pride in his eyes. "I told them to clear the room, Maddie. I told them to do it. They were resistant, afraid you'd be upset." I stared at him, confused. You told them?" "Of course," he said, his voice a low growl. "I told them. I wanted to see who, when the storm came, would cling to the walls, and who would cling to the truth." He squeezed my hand. "You did well. You went for the truth." I felt the last 36 hours crash down on me. The erased room, the isolation. It was his test. He had let them do it, just to see how they, and I, would react. "I have the POA, the supplement." "The videos?" I whispered, the words tumbling out. "Hannah is filing. The money is frozen. APS is here." "Good," he said. "Good. Now they're all here. The meeting. Is it soon?" 9:30? In the library." "I'll be there," he said, starting to push himself up. "Just give me 30 minutes. I need to prepare." "Roland," I said, stopping him. "You don't prepare. I prepare. You're the asset. I'm the analyst. You need to rest. Let me handle the meeting." He looked at me, a small, grim smile. "And what will you do?" "What you taught me to do," I said. "Hannah's associate is on his way to secure the evidence. I've got 3 binders. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to accuse." He nodded, leaning back, his eyes sharp. "Good. Don't yell. Just count the numbers for them. Count every single number." I walked out of his room, closing the door. In the hall, a new face, a sharp-looking young man in a suit, was waiting. "Miss Knight David from Harbor Finch. Hannah sent me. I'm here for the chain of custody, and I'm here to serve them." I handed him binders B and C and the original POA from the bank. "The meeting is in 30 minutes. Secure those. Be ready to file the trust supplement on Hannah's signal." "Yes, ma'am." I kept binder. A. The timeline. My presentation. I walked to the library, my mind clear, my heart cold. I was no longer a victim. I was the one holding the audit. The library was an execution chamber dressed in mahogany. The air was thick with the smell of old leather and floor wax. Marla, Brett, and Terry Qualls were already seated at the massive oak table, arranged like a tribunal. They had chosen their seats. They were on one side, a united front. They had left a single, isolated chair for me at the opposite end. They looked up as I walked in, their expressions a curated blend of concern and mild irritation at my presence. I did not take the chair they offered. I walked to the head of the table, Roland's seat, and placed my laptop down. I plugged it into the room's integrated presentation screen, a 55-inch monitor, hidden behind a painting of a forest, lit up, showing my desktop. I set my 3 binders down next to the laptop. Binder A, binder B, binder C. The sound of them hitting the polished wood was loud in the silence. Marla, annoyed by my choice of seating, spoke first. "Madison, this is a private family meeting. We're glad you're here, of course, but your counsel isn't necessary." I looked at David, Hannah's associate, who had taken a seat by the door, along with the court-certified stenographer, who was already setting up her equipment. "They are not negotiable." "Marla," I said, "this is now a matter of record." Before she could protest, the library doors opened again. Roland Hale walked in. He was not in his robe. He was dressed in his favorite gray flannel trousers, a crisp blue shirt, and a cashmere cardigan. He was leaning on a cane, a slight affectation, but his eyes were clear. He walked slowly, deliberately. Behind him, as a silent, professional shadow, was Dr. Estevez, the independent doctor appointed by the court. Marla gasped, genuinely shocked. "Father, what are you doing? You should be resting." Opal said, "Opal is gone," Roland said, his voice quiet but carrying. He did not look at his daughter. He walked to the side of the table and took a seat near me, but separate, a position of observation. Dr. Estevez did not sit at the table, but took a chair against the back wall, her briefcase on her lap. The power dynamic in the room had just been shattered. Terry Qualls, ever the facilitator, shuffled his papers. He was sweating, a fine sheen on his upper lip. "Roland, it's good to see you up. That's wonderful. But as your doctor said, you need rest. We were just handling the administrative load for your health." Marla composed herself, adopting a mask of filial piety. "That's right, Father. We're only here to help. We've been so worried. With your health being so variable, we all agree that we need to restructure the signing authority, just to take the burden off you." I pressed the first button on my laptop. The screen flickered to life. "No," I said. Marla stopped, mid-sentence. No, I repeated. "We're not here to restructure. We're here to review. I'm an analyst. My job is risk assessment, and for the last 36 hours, I've been conducting a risk assessment of this family." The first slide appeared. It was a high-resolution photograph of the Ridgeway storage tag on the shelf in my empty room. "Binder. At the timeline," I said, my voice cold and flat, the voice I use for boardrooms. "At approximately 5:30 a.m. yesterday, I arrived at this house to find my keycard deactivated and my room erased. This," I tapped the screen, "is the storage tag, authorized by T. Qualls, that proved my possessions were removed." "We explained that," Marla said, her voice rising. "It was for the nursing suite. It was necessary. It was strategic," I said. The slide changed. A screenshot of the Northgate Shield security log. The cameras for the East Wing were taken offline for a 45-minute maintenance window, precisely correlating with the removal of my belongings. The slide changed again. A screenshot of the Trust's resident beneficiary clause. "And this is why, to void my legal standing as a resident beneficiary, a status required for me to oversee your medical decisions, you didn't just clear a room, you attempted to perform a legal amputation." Terry Qualls laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Madison, this is paranoia. It's fantastical. You're upset. We get it. But these are just standard estate procedures. You're seeing conspiracy in paperwork." "I am seeing fraud," I said. The slide changed. It was the fraudulent power of attorney. "This is the POA that was intended to be the centerpiece of this meeting, the one that transfers all of Roland's authority to you, Terry, and to you, Marla." "That is a valid document," Terry snapped, his face reddening. "Roland signed it. He was tired. He asked me to help. He signed it on November 3rd. "He did not." The slide changed. A split screen. On the left, the forged signature. On the right, Terry's signature from the board minutes. Red circles highlighted the identical, looped, soft R in Roland and T in Terry. The stenographer's fingers flew. Brett stared at the screen, his mouth open. "You used your own handwriting, Terry," I said quietly. "You were arrogant, or you were sloppy, or both." That's not, this is libel," Terry stammered. The notary seal is valid. It's from Kestrel." The slide changed. A new photo, a close-up of the notary seal. "This is a Stockwell 331 embosser," I said. "The kind you have in your office, the kind you use for all your prestige documents." And the slide changed again. An email. "And this is a sworn, notarized affidavit from Kestrel Notary, received yesterday, confirming they have not processed any documents for Roland Hale in over 6 months. They confirm this seal is a fabrication." The room was absolutely silent, save for the click-clack of the stenographer. Terry Qualls looked as if he had been struck. He was pale, shaking, his eyes darting to the door. "But the why is always the most interesting part," I continued, my voice relentless. "Why the rush? Why forge a document when you could have, perhaps, convinced him? I turned to Brett. Because of this, the slide changed. A flowchart. I had spent hours on it. This is the money trail, I said. It starts with a UCC-1 lien, a hard money bridge loan, taken out by Terry Qualls, using estate assets as collateral. That's just portfolio management, Terry whispered. The collateral, I said, ignoring him, was Roland's $1.2 million Patek Philippe watch, a personal, not a trust, asset. And where did that bridge loan go? I clicked. An arrow pointed to a new box. It went here, to this shell corporation, PDX Nightlife Ventures, LLC. I looked directly at my cousin. That's your company, isn't it, Brett? The one you set up for the cocktail bar that failed. Brett exploded. It was an event advance. You don't know what you're talking about. It was approved. An event advance? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Why, Brett, would you use your grandfather's priceless personal timepiece as collateral to advance money for your failing bar? Why would you collateralize his legacy to pay your liquor invoices? You? Brett was on his feet, his face purple. You bitch! You have no... Sit down. Brett? The voice was not mine. It was Roland's. It was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. Brett froze, then slowly, uncertainly, sat back down. Roland coughed, a dry, papery sound. He looked at Dr. Estevez. Doctor, in your professional opinion, am I competent to be in this room? Dr. Estevez looked at the group. I have just completed a full cognitive and medical evaluation of Mr. Hale. He is fully lucid, oriented, and, in my opinion, 100% competent to make any and all decisions regarding his estate, his finances, and his medical care. Roland nodded, a short, sharp gesture. Thank you, Doctor. He looked at me. Madison, your proposal. I took a breath. My proposal is not emotional. It is procedural, effective immediately. I propose a full suspension of all of Terry Qualls' fiduciary powers, pending a complete, external audit by a firm of my choosing. I propose all governing authority for the trust and the holdings company be transferred to a dual governance structure, co-managed by an independent, court-appointed trustee and Hannah Whitcomb as counsel. You can't do that, Marla shrieked, finding her voice. This is a coup. This is what you are doing. You are grabbing the estate, father. Can't you see? She's turning you against your own family. She's after your money. I did not answer her. I pressed the button on my laptop. The screen changed. The dark, grainy video from the file cabinet. Roland's face filled the screen. This is Roland Hale. This recording is being made on September 14th. Marla, Brett, and Terry watched, horrified, as my grandfather, healthy and strong, spoke from the screen. They watched him list the accounts. They watched as he named me as his agent. And then they heard him say, if any power of attorney is presented that is dated after September 14th of this year, it is a forgery. It is an act of fraud. Do not trust any POA after this date. The video ended. The screen went black. Marla was staring at her father, her face a mask of disbelief. You tested us. You set us up. Roland looked at his daughter, and for the first time, I saw not anger, but a profound, bone-deep sadness. You were tested, he said, his voice rough. And you failed. He turned his gaze, cold and hard, to me. I choose the one who keeps me, not the one who keeps the money. Terry Qualls was no longer watching. He was on his cell phone, his back to the room, whispering frantically into it, no doubt to his lawyer, or to the hard money lender. David, Hannah's associate, caught my eye from the door. He held up his own phone and tapped its screen, then made a slashing gesture. The message was clear. Hannah had just been notified of Terry's call. The TRO was live, and had just been served to all parties' counsels. Terry's phone must have buzzed in his hand with the notification from his own lawyer, because he stiffened, his whispered words stopping. He looked at his screen. He looked at me. He looked at Roland. He knew he was trapped. The money was frozen. The account he was trying to access was gone. "This meeting is not over," Marla said, her voice shaking with rage. "You cannot just walk in here and take over." "I'm not taking anything over, Marla," I said, closing my laptop. "I'm not demanding a new share. I'm not asking for a payout. I am demanding transparency." I turned to the stenographer, ensuring this was on the record. "I demand a full, audited history of every transfer from the holdings account for the last 24 months. I demand a full repayment of all fees paid to Sunline Care Partners, a company hired under false pretenses. And I demand that all medical authority, all POAs, revert to the original, valid document from 2018, which I have in my possession, and which names me as primary agent." I looked at Roland. "And he will have an independent, board-certified medical team, approved by me and Dr. Estevez." The meeting was over. There was no explosion, no grand finale. There was just the cold, hard weight of the evidence, the click-click-click of the stenographer, and the heavy, suffocating silence of three people who had just watched their entire world dissolve. It was not a checkmate, not yet, but I had taken their queen, their rooks, and all they had left on the board were pawns. And they knew it. The library had been a pressurized chamber of my own making. The courtroom, the next morning, was a sterile vacuum. We were not in a grand trial. This was an emergency hearing in the Multnomah County Courthouse, a functional gray room that smelled of weak coffee and old files. The purpose was singular. Marla and Terry were challenging my TRO. They were trying to unfreeze the money. Judge Peterson, a woman in her late 60s with a reputation for zero tolerance, looked down at us. She had already reviewed binders A, B, and C. "Mr. Harrison," she said to Marla's new, expensive-looking lawyer, "you're challenging this restraining order. On what grounds?" Harrison was slick. "On the grounds of theater, Your Honor. This entire action is based on the emotional outburst of a disgruntled granddaughter. The evidence is circumstantial, and the so-called video evidence is inadmissible. It's unauthenticated." Hannah Whitcomb stood. She did not approach the bench. She stood as if she owned the ground she was on. "Unauthenticated, Your Honor. We have provided the original file's metadata. We have the timestamp September 14th. We have the digital chain of custody from the drive, which was retrieved from a secure location known only to Mr. Hale. And we have this—" The projector lit up. On one side, Roland's signature from the 2018 POA. On the other, the forged R from the document Terry created, and beside it, Roland's handwritten letter. "We have also," Hannah said, "provided 5 known, undisputed samples of Mr. Hale's handwriting from the last 6 months. A layperson can see the forgery. Your Honor, we are prepared to have a forensic expert certify it, but it hardly seems necessary." "It's a complete fabrication," Harrison countered. "Mr. Hale was ill. His handwriting was weak. Terry Qualls merely assisted him." "Did Mr. Qualls also assist the notary?" Hannah asked, her voice dangerously polite. "Because we have a sworn affidavit from Kestrel Notary confirming they never signed, nor saw, that document. The seal was faked. That is not assistance. Mr. Harrison, that is fraud." The judge silenced them. "I have the affidavits. I've seen the handwriting. I want to hear from the doctor." She swore in Dr. Estevez. The doctor was concise and professional. "Doctor," the judge said, "you saw Mr. Roland Hale yesterday. In your expert opinion, what is his condition?" "Mr. Hale is 100% lucid and competent," Dr. Estevez stated, her voice clear in the quiet room. "His cognitive function is well above average for his age. He is capable of making all of his own decisions. But his health," Harrison interjected. "He is frail. He requires rest." "He is frail?" Dr. Estevez asked, turning to him. "He is fatigued. Counsel, He is fatigued because he was being improperly medicated. She looked back at the judge. Your Honor, the pharmacology report from Sunline Care, the company hired by Mrs. Hale, shows a standing 3 times a day order for a benzodiazepine. This medication was not prescribed by his primary cardiologist. It was not medically indicated. In my opinion, it was being used as a chemical restraint to induce the very confusion and fatigue that the family was using as a justification to isolate him. A low murmur went through the back of the courtroom. Terry Qualls, sitting 3 feet from me, looked physically ill. Judge Peterson's eyes narrowed. I see. She turned to the lawyer from Northvale Trust, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else on earth. And you, the judge said, her voice like ice. Your trust, managing hundreds of millions of dollars, changed the primary contact on this account from the beneficiary himself to his daughter, based on what this fraudulent POA, the lawyer swallowed, and an email, Your Honor, from Mrs. Hale, assuring us her father was unwell. An email, the judge repeated, her voice flat. She was not asking a question. She looked at her notes for a moment. The silence was absolute. This is my order, she said, and the sound of her gavel striking the wood made even me jump. The temporary restraining order is upheld and extended. The assets of the Northvale Trust and Hale Meridian Holdings remain frozen. I am appointing an independent, temporary trustee for a period of 60 days, who will take immediate control of all accounts. Mr. Terry Qualls, she said, looking directly at him. You will turn over every book, every ledger, every password, and every file to that trustee within 24 hours. If you fail, I will hold you in contempt. She looked at Brett's lawyer. Mr. Brett Hale will provide a full, audited accounting of all funds related to his PDX nightlife ventures, specifically the source and disposition of the bridge loan secured by Mr. Hale's personal property. 24 hours. Harrison, Marla's lawyer, stood up, looking flustered. Your Honor, my client, Marla Hale, she is his daughter. She loves her father. She only wants to see him. We request that her visitation rights be protected. Visitation rights? The judge scoffed. He is not in prison. Mr. Hale is free to see whomever he wishes. But, she said, her eyes locking on Marla, this court is now taking a supervisory role in his care. Visitation is open. However, every single visit will be attended by a neutral, court-appointed care provider. If I hear one report, that you have discussed this case, his finances, his lawyers, or Madison Knight with him, I will revoke your access entirely. You are not to agitate him, Mrs. Hale. Am I clear? Marla sat down, her face ashen. As the judge was gathering her papers, a clerk entered from a side door and handed her a simple, cream-colored envelope. Your Honor, the clerk said. A letter, submitted to the court. It was delivered by courier this morning, with a notarized signature, from a Mrs. Clara Petrie. I saw Marla flinch. Judge Peterson opened the letter and read it silently. Her expression went from stern to furious. She looked up, not at the lawyers, but at Marla. Mr. Harrison, the judge said, this is a sworn letter from your client's former housekeeper, a woman who worked for Mr. Hale for 30 years. She states she was forcibly retired by Mrs. Hale and Mr. Qualls just last week. She claims, under oath, that your client told her, and I quote, we need to reduce the number of witnesses here. Clara, father is very ill, and he gets confused by old faces. She's a disgruntled employee, Harrison said, standing. She is a witness, Judge Peterson snapped. A witness to what this court is beginning to see as a clear pattern of manipulation. And that is when the final, beautiful, terrible domino fell. Harrison, in a full-blown panic, was trying to do damage control. He was trying to justify the one thing that had started it all. Your Honor, he said, shuffling his papers, my client's actions were not manipulation. They were administrative Ms. Knight is angry because her room was cleared. It was a simple reorganization. It was necessary for the nursing care we have. We have emails documenting the need to update the residents' protocols. It was all procedural. He was desperate, trying to find a piece of paper. Here, Exhibit D, internal estate communications. It just shows they were organizing. He grabbed the stack of papers and handed them to the clerk, who handed them to the judge. Hannah stood up, slow and watchful. Your Honor, opposing counsel has just submitted a document that was not included in our shared discovery list. May I see it? The judge, looking annoyed, handed the stack to Hannah. Hannah read the top page. Her face remained neutral. Then, she looked up, and I saw it. It was the faintest, smallest smile, the smile of a predator that has just watched its prey walk into a trap. Your Honor, Hannah said, her voice smooth and appreciative. I would like to thank Mr. Harrison. He has just, in his haste, submitted into the official court record a document that proves our entire case. Harrison's face froze. What, that's the email about the room logistics. Indeed, it is, Hannah said. She held it up. It is an email. From Terry Qualls to Marla Hale. Dated October 22nd. Subject, the residency problem. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what she was holding. I will read it into the record, Hannah continued. Marla, as we discussed, we must proceed with clearing M's room. I have reviewed the trust with counsel. The resident beneficiary clause in Section 9 is a direct roadblock to the new POA. We must legally terminate her residency status before the Thanksgiving meeting. The storage unit is confirmed. This will, procedurally, downgrade her from resident to visitor. We can then proceed as planned. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Mr. Harrison, Marla's lawyer, looked at the paper. He looked at Terry. He looked at Marla. He was white as a ghost. He had just, in his incompetence, handed the judge a written confession of their conspiracy. Judge Peterson slowly took off her glasses. She cleaned them. She put them back on. She looked at Marla, at Brett, and at Terry. Her voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. Manipulation, she said. That is the word I used. It appears I was too kind. Mr. Harrison, you have just entered evidence of premeditated, intentional fraud into my court. You have proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that your clients lied to this court. They lied to Dr. Estevez, and they engaged in a conspiracy to unlawfully strip Mr. Hale of his assets and his granddaughter of her legal standing. She pointed her pen at them. This is my final warning. This is no longer just a family dispute. This is a criminal matter. If any of you violate one word of my order, if you attempt to move $1, if you so much as frighten that old man, I will not only issue sanctions that will bankrupt you personally, I will refer this entire file, including this email, directly to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. You are dismissed. The walk back from the courthouse was not triumphant. It was sterile. Hannah and I didn't celebrate. We planned. The court's order was a shield. But the real work of untangling the fortress began now. The fallout was immediate and surgical. Before we had even driven back to Seabrook, Northvale Trust, in a full-blown panic to distance themselves from the fraud, had appointed the temporary trustee. She was a woman named Elizabeth Warren, no, not that one, a notorious, ice-cold forensic accountant from a top Portland firm. She was the one who would now be co-signing every check, including the one for the electric bill. An independent auditor was hired by her, not by us, to begin the deep dive into Hale Meridian Holdings. The first casualty of the new regime was Sunline Care Partners. Their contract was terminated by the temporary trustee for cause, citing the medical testimony of Dr. Estevez. Their corporate lawyers didn't even fight. They just wanted their name removed from the court filings. I was in the kitchen, organizing a delivery of fresh groceries, real food, not the low-sodium paste they had been feeding him when Opal Gray came to say goodbye. She was not in her crisp scrubs. She was in civilian clothes, looking diminished, tired, and profoundly ordinary. She was carrying a single cardboard box. She didn't come to me. She walked out onto the back porch, where Roland was sitting, bundled in a blanket, watching the ocean. I watched them through the glass. She stood there for a full minute before he looked up. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her shoulders shake. I saw her nod, her face crumbling. She was apologizing, not to me, the one who had caught her, but to him, the man she had been paid to isolate. He listened. He did not look angry. He just looked old. Finally, he nodded. Once, a curt, dismissive gesture of a king accepting a peasant's plea. She turned and walked to her car without looking back. The next to fall was Terry Qualls. He didn't just resign. He evaporated. His office was cleared out by noon. The only sign he had ever existed was a single, desperate email he sent to Hannah's office, copied to the new trustee. It was a plea for a civil settlement. He would cooperate fully with the audit. He would not contest the forgery allegations. If we would just agree not to refer the matter for criminal prosecution or to the state bar. He was offering to trade his silence for his law license. I was on the phone with Hannah when it came in. "Tell him no," I said. "That's my girl," Hannah said. "I'm sending a reply. No negotiation will be entertained without a full, transparent, and sworn deposition, period. We would not be settling, we would be dissecting." Brett's destruction was less legal and more gravitational. The hard money lender, upon receiving a call from the court-appointed trustee, immediately called his loan, the full amount, plus penalties. The Patek Philippe was already in the trustee's vault, but the loan was still due. Brett, of course, had no money. The bank that held his venture accounts, upon seeing the UCC filing and the subsequent court order, froze his credit lines. He was, in a single afternoon, rendered penniless. His only asset, the cellar, was also returned. The Port Archer Rooms auction house, having been visited by a very polite but firm local police officer, had indefinitely postponed their private sale. The cases of wine were returned to the estate, inventoried by the new trustee, and put under lock and key. Brett's reputation in the event investment world, a world built entirely on fumes, and his grandfather's name, was gone. He was no longer a rebellious grandson. He was just a failed, middle-aged man in debt. Marla's consequence was quieter, and to her, infinitely worse. She tried to spin the narrative. She called her friends. She called the chair of her charity board. She told them a story about her difficult niece, her confused father, and a misunderstanding about paperwork. It did not work. The court transcript, filed by the stenographer, was a public document. The story of her father's health did not hold up against the cold, black and white text of that email. We must legally terminate her residency status. The story of her concern did not square with Dr. Estevez's testimony about chemical restraints. Her friends stopped returning her calls. Her charity board, which included Arthur Davies and Judge Alito, asked for her temporary leave of absence to avoid distracting from their mission. She was not financially ruined, not yet. She was something worse. She was irrelevant. She was embarrassing. In her world, it was a death sentence. The house, free of their collective, frantic energy, felt different. It was lighter. Roland refused to stay in his sick room. We moved him to the ground floor library, a room with a fireplace, a view of the sea, and its own adjoining bath. It was a room of life, not of decline. My first act as his legal agent was to hire a new team. I called a company I had vetted 3 years ago, Hearthline Care. They were not a partner, they were a service. I interviewed the 2 nurses, a man and a woman, who would be on rotation. I signed the contract, and I had a clause added, a transparency protocol. All medical decisions, all visitations, all medication changes were to be logged in a shared digital portal, accessible by me, by Roland's primary cardiologist, and by the court. No more whispers, no more private instructions. The new rules were posted on the wall. Open visitation, from 9 in the morning until 8 at night. All visitors welcome. but all visitors must be logged. 3 days after the hearing, the house was clean. The last of the Northgate Shield guards were gone, replaced by Luis's old, local team. The new nurse was reading the paper in the kitchen. Roland, who had been cleared of the sedatives, was restless. "Get your coat, Maddie," he said, pushing himself up with his cane. "I need to smell the ocean." We walked, slowly, along the cliff path that overlooked the private beach. The wind was cold and sharp, smelling of salt and pine. For a long time, we didn't speak. He just leaned on his cane, looking at the waves. "You're angry," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm processing," I said. "Why, Roland? Why the test? Why let them get that far? Why clear my room? You could have just told me." He turned to me, his eyes the color of the gray sea. "Because telling doesn't prove anything. I needed to see. I needed to know who they really were. And who am I?" "You're the one I'm talking to," he said simply. He pointed with his cane at the churning water. "You look at them, at Marla, at Brett. They don't love me, Maddie. They love the things I have. They love the money. And people who love money, real, easy money, they will sell anything to keep it. They will sell their honor. They will sell their word. And if they get desperate enough, they will sell their memories." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "They were trying to sell their memory of me, as their father, and they were trying to sell my memory of you." I looked away, the cold wind stinging my eyes. "I was afraid," I admitted, the words tasting like metal. "The whole time, I was terrified you would think I was just like them, that I was just another gold digger, fighting for a piece of the mine." Roland let out a short, harsh laugh. "A gold digger, Maddie. They were fighting over the gold. You were fighting for the mine, the structure, the foundation, the person. That's what they never understood." He tapped my arm with his gloved hand. "You were protecting the person, not the prize. That's why you won." We stood there until the sun began to dip, turning the gray water to a flat, cold steel. We did not change the trust, not yet. We did not disinherit anyone. When I met with Roland and the new trustee, I did not ask for a share. I asked for a rule book. "We need a new governance," I explained, my binders open, but this time in a spirit of construction, not destruction. "From now on, all trust expenses, all allocations, all consulting fees must be presented in a quarterly report, a report that is public to the entire family, every dollar accounted for." Rolsland took it a step further. "A family council," he said, the old spark in his eye. "We'll run it like a board, and a board needs independent directors." He made 2 calls. He invited Arthur Davies and Judge Alito, the 2 men I had sent the video to join the Hale Family Council as non-voting, independent advisors. They both accepted. Marla and Brett's allocations would now be reviewed, not just by an accountant, but by a retired federal judge and the head of the largest foundation in the state. My victory was not a check. It was a set of bylaws. I moved my things back into the East Wing, into the room that had been erased. I did not ask for the furniture to be brought back from Ridgeway Storage. The new trustee offered, but I refused. I bought a simple bed, a desk, a lamp. I left the walls bare. I left the bookshelves empty. I needed the reminder. I needed to wake up every morning in that sterile, empty room, to remember that security doesn't come from possessions. It doesn't live in the furniture. It lives in the foundation. It lives in the truth. I wrote a letter on my new, simple stationery. It was to Mrs. Petrie. I apologized for what she had been through. I did not offer her her old job back. That would be an insult. I offered her a new one. Honorary family consultant. It came with a generous salary, to be paid by me personally, and one duty, to have lunch with my grandfather once a week, to tell him the truth, and to tell me if he's lying about taking his vitamins. She accepted. I was settling in. The house was quiet. The war, it seemed, was over. We were in the long, slow, boring process of audits and reconstruction. Then, last night, an envelope was slipped under my door. Not a text, not an email, an envelope, heavy vellum. My name, Madison, was written on the front, in Roland's unmistakable, sharp handwriting. I opened it. It was not a long letter, just one sentence. Meet me tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, in the study. We're not finished. A cold dread, one I had not felt since I first saw my empty room, settled in my stomach. The house was quiet, too quiet. The audit was closing in. The final pieces were being moved, and I had the sudden, chilling feeling that the person who was about to be put in check had not been in the courtroom. At 9 o'clock, I walked into the study. The room was not set up for a confrontation. It was quiet. The fire was lit, and Roland was sitting in his high-backed leather chair, not at his desk. Hannah Whitcomb was there, as was Elizabeth Warren, the temporary trustee. They were standing by the fireplace, drinking coffee. It felt final. "Madison," Roland said, his voice calm. "Come in." He gestured to his desk. In the top left drawer, I had David, your lawyer friend, install a small safe. The combination is your mother's birthday. Open it. I looked at Hannah, who nodded. I went to the desk, my fingers finding the new, small digital keypad. I entered the numbers. The safe clicked open. Inside, there was an envelope and a single key on a plain ring. "Bring them here." I brought the contents back to his chair. He took the envelope. "This," he said, holding the thick vellum, "is the trust supplement, the one I was waiting for you to come home to sign." He handed it to me. I opened it. I saw the text. The clauses I had read in the bank vault, the restructuring, the audit requirements, the capped allocations. But at the end, on the signature page, it was no longer blank. There were 3 signatures. Roland Hale, dated today. Elizabeth Warren, as temporary trustee, dated today. And a third, a witness. Hannah's associate, David, is a notary, Hannah explained, stepping forward. "We had it signed, witnessed, and filed with the court this afternoon. It is now the governing document of the Hale estate." I read the final terms. They were even sharper than the draft. All supervisory power over Hale Meridian Holdings was transferred, permanently, to the independent trustee's office. Marla and Brett were removed from all boards. They had lost all signing rights. And a new clause, one I hadn't seen: final veto power on all non-liquid asset transactions, defined as any transaction exceeding $50,000, is granted to Madison Knight. You gave me veto power," I whispered, looking at him. "I didn't give you a weapon," Roland said. "I gave you a shield for the company. You're the only one who knows how to spot the risk. You are not a manager. You are an auditor. And now, you are the auditor for life." He pointed to the key in my hand. "That's for you. It's an apology for the room." I looked at the envelope that had been under the key. My name was on it. I opened it. It was not a letter. It was a deed, a title to a property. Alder Lake Cabin, 1400 North Shore Road. I stared at him, confused. "I bought it 2 years ago," he said, a small, sheepish smile on his face. "I've been having it fixed up. I like to prepare early. I thought, one day, you'd want a place that wasn't this mausoleum, a place that was just yours." A house. He had bought me a house, 2 years ago, long before any of this. "Roland," I started, but he held up a hand. "We are not finished," he said. "There is one last piece, the piece I did not know about, the piece that Elizabeth, your trustee, found in the audit." He nodded to the large television screen. Elizabeth, the trustee, a woman who communicated in spreadsheets, picked up the remote. "Mr. Qualls was sloppy," she said, her voice flat. "He not only used his own handwriting, He used the company-paid phone line to plan his conspiracy. She pressed a button. The screen lit up. It was not a video. It was an audio file, with a date stamp September 10th. 4 days before Roland made his first video, a voice filled the room, Terry's voice, oily and confident. No, the Port Archer rooms are perfect. Yes, the seller assets. But the big move, the real move, is the POA. We're getting the new one signed. Don't worry. Roland he's fatigued. He's agreeable. We have the new POA, and we can start liquidating the art by the 1st of the year. The recording stopped. I felt the blood drain from my face. September 10th. This was not a reaction to Roland's test. This was not a sudden, greedy impulse. They had been planning this. They had coined the new POA before Roland even knew. His test. He had not been the one setting the trap. He had been the one walking into it. He was trying to get ahead of Roland, I said, the pieces clicking into place. Roland's test, the cleared room, that just accelerated their plan. It did, Hannah said. They were already in motion. Your arrival just made them panic. And panic, she smiled, makes for excellent evidence. As if summoned by the very concept of panic, the library doors burst open. It was Marla. And right behind her, Brett. They were not invited. They were not announced. They were here, a last, desperate charge. Marla's face was a wreck of tear-streaked makeup and rage. Brett just looked, empty. "Father," Marla cried, rushing in. You can't do this. You can't let her. You can't let them." She stopped when she saw Hannah, and then her eyes fell on Elizabeth Warren. She realized, too late, that this was not a family chat. This was an ambush. "Marla, Brett," Hannah said, her voice a whip crack. "How unexpected. You're just in time for the final resolution." "We are here to appeal to our father," Marla said, drawing herself up, trying to reclaim some dignity. "We are here to beg his forgiveness, and to ask him to stop this circus, to stop her." She pointed at me. "A circus?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I had not spoken yet. I stood up from the desk. "You think this is a circus?" I walked over to the presentation screen. I plugged in my own laptop. "You want to talk about family, Marla?" "Let's talk about family." I pulled up my own presentation, the one I had been building since I found my empty room. "You're here to talk about money," I said. "You're here to beg for your allocations. You're here to save your shares. I'm not here to talk about money. I'm here to present my schedule of non-financial damages." The screen lit up. The first image, my empty room. "This," I said, "is the cost of your actions. Not in dollars, in trust. This is the physical act of erasing a family member." I clicked. The next slide, the empty wall, with the faint outlines of my photos. This is the cost of memory. The decision to not just remove a person, but to remove the proof of that person. The photograph of me and my grandfather. The one you replaced with a picture of Brett cutting a ribbon. I looked at Brett. He flinched. I clicked again. A screenshot of the Sunline Care contract. This is the cost of isolation. The Tier 3 isolation package. You didn't just care for him. You monetized his loneliness. You bought a service that turned your father into a prisoner. I clicked a final time. A screenshot of my deactivated keycard log. And this is the cost of belonging. This is the digital equivalent of a shunning. You did not just lock me out of a house. You threw a cold, hard splash of water on the very concept of family. You told me, in the clearest terms possible, you are not one of us. You are a liability to be managed. I turned off the screen. "You're here to ask for a second chance," I said, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, controlled fury. "You're asking for money. I am here to tell you, you are bankrupt, not financially, morally. and that is a debt no one in this room can repay." The silence was absolute. Marla was staring at me, her mouth open. She had no defense. Roland Hale leaned forward in his chair. He looked at his daughter. He looked at his grandson. He was not sad. He was not angry. He was just finished. "Anyone," Roland said, his voice a low, final judgment, "who erases a person from this house, erases their own name from the asset ledger." He nodded to Elizabeth Warren. The trustee stood, a sheaf of papers in her hand. She was now the voice of the estate. "Pursuant to the court order and the new, fully executed trust supplement," she began, in a clear, emotionless monotone, "the following resolutions are final and effective immediately. 1. Terry Qualls is terminated, for cause, from all association with the Hale Estate, Northvale Trust, and Hale Meridian Holdings. A formal demand for the repayment of all fees and commissions for the last 12 months has been issued. 2. The full findings of our audit, including the evidence of wire fraud, the forged POA, and the fabricated notary seal, have been compiled. That file," she looked at Hannah, "is being transferred to the Multnomah County District Attorney and the Oregon State Bar for criminal and disciplinary review." Terry was not just fired, he was finished. 3. She turned her gaze to Marla and Brett. "Mrs. Hale, Mr. Hale, your positions on the board are terminated, your signing rights are revoked, your access to all company accounts is sealed." "Please," Marla whispered, tears now genuine. "Please, Father, a chance, a way to fix this." Roland looked at her. Then he looked at me. He was not asking for permission. He was offering me the final move. I looked at Marla. My heart was cold, but it was not merciless. "You want a chance," I said. "This is not a negotiation. This is a penance." "Hannah." Hannah stepped forward, handing me a single sheet of paper. "This is the Marla Hale Protocol," I said. "You have one path back, not to power, but to neutrality. One, you will enter a 12-month mandatory financial counseling program with an auditor of my choice. You will learn what a budget is. 2, you will surrender, permanently, all claims to any signing authority, board seat, or managerial role. You are a beneficiary. That is all. 3, you will operate under a full transparency program. Every expense, every request, goes through Elizabeth's office, and it is copied to me. If you abide by these rules, for 12 months, you retain your non-voting, preferential shares in the trust. You will receive your allocation. But if you violate one term, if you call a bank, if you try to influence a board member, if you so much as send a threatening email, a trigger clause," I said, tapping the paper, "is enacted, and your shares are forfeited, not to me, to the charitable trust. Do you understand?" Marla was shaking. It was a complete and total surrender. She looked at her father. He was silent. She looked at me. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Roland Hale reached for the pen. He signed the Marla Hale Protocol at the bottom. Next to my signature, he slid it across the table. Seal stamp. Execute now. The library doors opened, not with a bang, but with a soft push from the new nurse. The sea air, cold and clean, flooded the room, smelling of salt. Marla and Brett, now just shadows, left. I stood by the window, looking at the wall where the memory photos had been. The wall was still blank. My revenge. It wasn't what I thought. It wasn't about getting my things back. It wasn't about winning, or even about the money. It was about this, the silence, the new rules, the clean air. My revenge was not cashing them out. It was installing a new operating system. It was ensuring that no one, ever again, could mistake loyalty for weakness. I didn't stay in the mansion. That night, I took the key. I drove the 2 hours to Alder Lake. The cabin was small, built of cedar and glass, just like the mansion. But it was not a fortress. It was a shelter. I walked in. The air smelled of new wood. On the simple mantelpiece, I placed a single picture frame. It was a new photo, one I had taken yesterday, on my phone. When Roland and I were on the cliff, we were not holding a fish. We were just standing there, him leaning on his cane, me with my arm around him, the sunset turning the ocean to fire behind us. I sat on the floor, watching the moonlight on the lake. My phone buzzed. A text. From Roland. "Fishing tomorrow, 7 in the morning. Don't be late." I smiled. The war was over. And it had ended, as all things must. Not in victory, but in truth, in honor. Thank you for listening. Audience, let us know in the comments where you are listening from, so we can connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.